Thank you, Hans. Thank you very much, and very nice to be joining you here from Sydney, Australia. A long way from where you are, and I hope you're all well, and I hope we can entertain you for the next hour. First of all, I'd like to thank Hans and Sam and their colleagues for organising this webinar, as well as Vida Rosita, who is now working for the IEA, but a couple of years ago, she was working as a consultant and wrote for us a case study about smart homes. And much of the material in this presentation is based on her work. So I'd like to thank Vida for that. Just in terms of what I'll talk about, it'll take a little while to introduce the topic to you of smart homes, and in particular, energy saving smart homes. And then some of the barriers and what we can do about the barriers that prevent these homes from flourishing in the marketplace. And then some conclusions. So introducing the topic, it's quite a complex one, especially for those that have not been exposed to it very much. And my organisation that I work for is called EDNA. We're the Electronic Devices and Networks Annex. We're an annex of the IEA's 4E TCP. And that's the IEA's Technology Collaboration Program on Energy Efficient End-Use Equipment. And EDNA is like a part of that. We're called an annex. We're not part of the IEA. We form a collaboration with the IEA, as do the users to TCP. So we're sort of sister organisations with the users TCP. However, EDNA's focused on providing technical and policy guidance for energy efficiency, particularly for connected devices which are connected to a communications network and typically connected to the internet. So those kinds of devices we call connected devices, and they often will operate in a system with other connected devices. And those connected devices and those systems, we are trying to provide policy guidance for policymakers to improve the energy efficiency of those, and I'll dive into all that in a moment. But we have 14 member countries. You'll see them listed at the bottom of that slide there. As I said, I'm the operating agent, and I sort of convene the activities of the annex. So there's two things we really talk about when we're talking about the energy implications of connectivity of devices and households. There are two sides to this. One is there are energy savings available, because by way of being connected to the internet, these kinds of devices, appliances, lights, HVAC systems and so on, they're able to communicate, of course. And what that means is they can participate in what we call an intelligent efficiency system. So, and I'll provide some examples in a moment of what that is. So that's sort of one of the ways that these systems of connected devices, for example, in a smart home, can save energy by virtue of intelligence and connectivity. And the other side of that is demand flexibility. So they're able to be controlled and support the grid at times when that's required. And again, I'll talk a bit more about that in a moment. So that's the upside, if you like, for connected devices, energy savings capability. I include demand flexibility as an energy saving, even though strictly speaking it's not, but it just helps to sort of group it that way. The downside that we also focus on is the energy cost. And because devices, if they're connected to the internet, they need to be connected all the time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including at times when they're not providing their primary function. And there's energy required to do that. And that energy cost, we call that network standby energy. That's energy used by the device when it's in a standby mode, but still connected to and talking to a communications network. We're more focused today on the energy savings side. The energy cost side we deal a lot with and elsewhere, and I won't sort of bore you too much with that, but the energy savings side is more what today's presentation is about. So just to sort of dig a little deeper on that, intelligent efficiency. And we sort of loosely define this as the operation of a system of connected devices so that they respond to changing conditions of the external environment in order to maximize energy savings. For example, the control of a lighting system or an HVAC system based on sensors for occupancy and temperature and weather forecasts and so on can provide these kinds of what we call intelligent energy savings. But it's not just a building management system, for example. The system is more intelligent. It can optimize lighting and HVAC systems, and it can also learn about the best ways to save energy. It might use algorithms and big data in the cloud. It might even use artificial intelligence, but it's a highly sophisticated system of connected devices that can be controlled and can learn about the best ways to save energy. Now there are, I won't go through this slide in detail, but there are opportunities here to save energy. We sort of done a lot in the energy efficiency community for devices on their own to make them more efficient with minimum energy performance standards and labeling, regulations and policies for individual devices to save energy. But the next frontier is operating systems of devices efficiently, for example, in a smart home. And there are, studies have shown there are benefits, energy saving benefits available from that. The second area of energy savings, in inverted commas, is from demand flexibility. Now, demand flexibility is not necessarily about saving energy, but it's about creating changes in the way users use their energy and their end-use devices, and changing those patterns of use from their normal consumption patterns in response to changing energy market conditions. So at times when there's limited supply of electricity or there's constraints in the energy grid, then these kinds of devices can provide, if they're working properly and set up properly, they can provide demand flexibility to alleviate those kinds of conditions in the electricity grid. So as I said, when I'm talking about energy savings, I really include demand flexibility in that. And again, there's an opportunity to reduce peaks. Of course, this is a graph of total sort of cooling load in China. And the black line represents, what's possible if HVAC systems used connectivity and intelligence to assist with demand flexibility. So there's certainly opportunities. The question is how to go about taking advantage of those opportunities. So that's what I'm going to talk a bit more about. First of all, a smart energy saving home, and what is it? We're not just talking about a home that has a range of connected smart gadgets. There are lots of smart gadgets you can buy now, internet connected, that can be used to improve comfort of the user in the home, convenience, home security, that sort of thing. That's all fine and that's all smart, but that's not necessarily saving energy. So when we talk about a smart energy saving home, we're talking about a home which, in addition to some of those comfort and convenience benefits, is focused on energy savings and possibly also demand flexibility. Its major energy using devices would be connected to the internet: lights, HVAC, water heating appliances, and so on. Might also have solar panels, an electric vehicle, and a charging system, and an energy storage system. And all those things, if in a truly smart home, would operate to firstly to save energy and also to support the electricity grid by providing some demand flexibility. So that's a smart energy savings home. However, it needs other pieces of infrastructure, sensors in the home to sensor occupancy and learn about how users use that home. It typically would have a home energy management system, or HEMS, which is a sort of hub that the devices can talk to. We need a user interface so the users can input their preferences. Typically we'll have a smart meter and of course some sort of connection to the outside world. And as I said, it may use cloud services, big data, artificial intelligence to help it provide all these kinds of benefits. So that's a little taste of what we think about when we think about an energy-saving smart home. And now we'll sort of move on to, okay, well, why do we not see these homes as much as we might? There was some big predictions going back a few years about how this kind of technology would permeate, and it really hasn't to a great extent. So we're going to try and examine, some of the reasons for that, and discuss some of the possible solutions from a policy perspective. And it'd be great to hear some of your thoughts in the comments as well. So those barriers can be broken down really into 4 different areas: high costs, unclear benefits, complexity and technology risk, and privacy, trust, and security issues. And I'll talk about each of those now. Of course, smart devices cost more. A smart thermostat, I'm not sure if you see these in your country, but in the US, these are becoming more popular. This is a learning thermostat that does exactly the kinds of things we're talking about here, can learn about the best way to operate an HVAC system to save energy. They're $250 approximately versus $25 for a dumb thermostat. The smart lamp, which you probably have seen, is $25 US versus $5. So of course, these devices cost more. And in addition to that, there's the home infrastructure elements I talked about as well: communications, routers, hubs, home energy management systems, internet connections, smart meters, all those kinds of things, of course, cost money. And I won't talk too much about this particular barrier, high cost, because solutions are fairly well known to policymakers in terms of subsidies to reduce the prices of this kind of equipment. Also, creating the market conditions whereby energy utilities, for example, might be able to subsidise consumers to purchase and install these kinds of devices, either for pure energy saving reasons or for demand flexibility. So that is a vein of alleviating these kinds of high cost barriers that's used, and particularly in the US, we see this, but other parts of the world, the utility is often regulated to provide subsidies for these kinds of devices and to reap the benefits. So that's really costs. Again, that's the one we all know. The next barrier is unclear benefits. So not only are the costs high, but the benefits that these kinds of devices and homes should give us, they're not always clear to consumers either. And there's often mistrust about these benefits. People don't really understand, and I personally don't really understand how a smart thermostat delivers its energy saving, but it does, and that can add to people's mistrust about how these kinds of devices can magically save energy. The energy savings can be overstated by vendors, and that's we've seen examples of that where people do start to distrust the claims that are made. And without independent verification, without some sort of standard or a government accreditation, then it's often hard for consumers to believe some of the claims that are made by vendors of this kind of equipment. And this also applies not only to energy savings, but the other benefits that come claims, comfort, security, convenience, etc. Those benefits are not always believed as well. I mean, this is a very new area, and people, just not used to understanding what these kinds of devices and homes can deliver. So what can we do about that? Providing standards and methodologies to measure the benefits is one way. Providing information to consumers that's transparent and comparable, so they can compare different products and verified claims about the performance of those products. Independently verified would be good also, and indeed there's an example of this. Energy Star have a a specification. Energy Star's US run a voluntary labelling program. They have a new category for that label for smart home energy management systems, those smart thermostats I mentioned. So Energy Star will now test and verify and certify conforming smart thermostats using the Energy Star logo. So we're sort of starting to see that happening now. That's one way of addressing this barrier. Demonstration projects which can demonstrate the benefits might be useful. And there are other promotional elements that we've seen. At the bottom of the screen, in Germany, there's a smart grid ready heat pump label that's used, and the image at the bottom right is from an Australian labelling program where the energy rating label also carries an indication of the demand response capability of air conditioning and hot water systems. So we're starting to see some examples of these kinds of consumer-focused labels that are trying to provide some sort of assurance to consumers that these products will deliver the kinds of benefits that are being claimed. The next barrier, and this is a big one, probably the biggest, I would think, is complexity and technology risk. As I said, these technologies and homes are new. They're inherently complex. There's lots more to a smart thermostat than just a switch that opens and closes. They can be difficult to operate. They cannot interoperate. We use a term called interoperability, where, for example, you might have different devices installed in a home for security, for window shading, for lighting and thermostats, and each of those devices or sets of devices has its own smartphone app. So you end up with a smartphone app which has 5 different apps on it to control 5 different groups of equipment. And of course, none of that equipment will talk to another piece of equipment. System, may not talk to the window shading system and the lighting system. So you end up not having interoperability. And we would like to have interoperability. We'd like one app to control everything, make it easy for the consumer, and allow these devices to communicate with each other in order to take advantage of some of the knowledge they might hold at any one time that might help another device to save energy. That's definitely a big one. Related to that is a vendor lock-in effect, where a proprietor of a certain device will want their own operating system and their own app and their own platform to be the one that's used in your home, and they won't allow competitors' devices to also use that same app. And there are examples of these. I won't mention any brand names, but they're definitely examples where vendors are trying to lock customers into their own platform and lock out competitors. And that's, of course, a problem for interoperability. Also, these devices are evolving very quickly. So they're changing every day. We see a new model with new functionality. It's very hard for consumers to keep up with what's going on, and they may choose to wait until next week when there's a newer and better model that comes out. So, but just the sheer speed of evolution of these devices is also causing people to hang back. I've personally, had some devices where the vendor's gone out of business and the app is no longer supported. That's a problem too, and that's also, I think, related to the speed at which these technologies and companies are moving at. Also, that's really the devices. We also, I'm not sure if you experienced this, but I certainly have, and that's wireless setup. Trying to get devices to stay on my wireless network or get on my wireless network initially and then stay on my wireless network. I've had problems with that, as many others have. Internet connection to the outside world being unstable and losing that, meaning devices lose functionality. We've seen software glitches For example, in 2017 in the UK, a software update for smart TVs caused all the televisions models of this particular brand to stop working for several days. Also, another one is unending firmware and software updates, which I personally find frustrating, especially where I lose my settings or I have to go and relearn something. I find that to be quite frustrating. So all those things, and there's a big list of the sort of complexities that are involved with these technologies and the headaches they can cause for consumers. So what can we do about that? This is again, you know, quite a challenge, but there are examples where standards makers are trying to develop pathways and standards for interoperability. And there is one, a new one called ISO EEC 21823, which is interoperability for IoT systems. And IoT stands for Internet of Things, which is the Internet of Things is also what we're talking about here. It is everyday things and devices being connected to the internet. And this standard is designed to guide device manufacturers and authors of communications protocols towards interoperability for those devices, so they can all talk the same language and you know, same app. And that's one thing we could certainly promote and help the development of. Standards for communications reliability. I know this is something that the wireless standards people work on a lot, is how to make those more reliable so devices don't drop off so readily from the communications network. We should also be transparent with consumers about issues, solutions and results. So we're open about you know, what the challenges they will find, so they don't have too many surprises. And also, I think encourage good design of user interfaces, because I think there's quite a few user interfaces for these kinds of devices that are, you know, that don't not particularly user friendly and users find quite difficult to manage. I think all of those things and more, and I'll be curious to hear your comments. All of those things, I think, are things that could be done by the policy community to help with these kinds of barriers and complexities resulting from these technologies. So I'll move on to the last barrier, and this is privacy, trust and security. Consumers in general are concerned about how their data is used. And these kinds of devices do, of course, generate data about usage patterns and possibly much more sort of intimate details of consumers' lives. I think consumers are concerned about who gets this data and who gets access to it. It can be, of course, misused, and we've seen that. It can be aggregated from multiple sources to build enhanced profiles of consumers, which consumers, you know, may not like. There have been examples of hacking of devices, both devices and online databases, where unscrupulous hackers have got access to not only data but also to household, you know, Wi-Fi networks and computers within the house by hacking, you know, the device itself. And there's some documented examples of that. The consumers, of course, you know, don't like these things. In terms of policy solutions, there's a lot being done to address these privacy, trust and security concerns. In North America, for example, NIST is working on reliability and cybersecurity protocols. North American Electric Reliability Corporation's critical infrastructure protection standards being developed to try, especially for these kinds of energy using devices, to make sure that smart grids and the devices connected to them are protected and secure. Government regulations for privacy also useful so that consumers are protected by regulation. And also making sure that privacy policies are clearly stated when devices are purchased and well understood by consumers. So that's a fairly short and high-speed summary of some of the issues. There are a few to be addressed, a few challenges to be addressed, but I think there are certainly some solutions available. And there certainly are benefits from energy savings homes. We know that they can save energy over and above having just super efficient water heaters and appliances and lights. We can operate them in an intelligent efficiency manner to provide benefits, both for households and for the grid. It's early days for demand response and demand flexibility programs, but in the future, these kinds of programs are likely to be more popular, and we should think now about how we can make sure devices are ready for these kinds of programs. The barriers I talked about: high costs, unclear benefits, complexity and technology risk, and privacy, trust, and security issues. Policymakers could be active in this area, but what's required, I think, is a multi-dimensional response. You'll see some of those policy solutions for addressing these barriers will cut across, many areas: IT and privacy and standards making, lots of areas. And there need to be some sort of vision, overarching vision by policymakers, which is able to capture all these different elements, engage with the people and stakeholders that need to get involved in developing these policies. I think that's what's required to pull it all together. As I said, we could have some sort of early policy now, which helps devices to be demand response ready and smart home ready. And that's something that the EDNA's studying at the moment. We've just launched or published a study on this, and I'll provide the link in my last slide. And with all that, of course, this is an international issue. There's no point countries acting alone to try and solve these problems. These devices are sold globally, and we should cooperate internationally to try and develop policy solutions for these problems to make sure that smart homes, and particularly smart homes that save energy, can flourish. So thank you. I hope that was useful. My contact email is there. There's a link also to the EDNA publications library. The case study for smart homes on which this presentation is based is there, and there's a policy brief, links to both of those. And we have a related webinar coming up on the 2nd of June. The IEA are organising, which is called Smart Energy Saving Consumer Devices. And that's about digging deeper into that idea I mentioned about how do we make these devices ready as they roll off the production line. How do we make them ready to participate in smart homes and demand response initiatives? And you'll see as I mentioned, there's a link there to the study for that, on which the webinar will be based. We've also got some other studies in the works, a roadmap for consumer devices to participate in demand flexibility. They'll be published in about 2 weeks, as will a study we've done on IoT and digitalisation strategies, looking at the different strategies that countries and economies have developed for IoT and digitalisation strategies related to energy, and sort of comparing those and making some recommendations about how they might more include energy efficiency within them. We're also considering a topic called plug-and-play devices, which is, well, how can we make these devices more user-friendly? And that's one we're sort of early days of thinking about. So we're always trying to think of useful topics to study to provide policymakers with the sort of guidance they might need to develop policies in this area. So with that, I thank you, and I think I will now hand to Sam to say a few words.